Captain Elena Voss stood in the high chamber of the Accord, ash from Earth's flag still settling on the polished obsidian floor. The Council of Nine had just committed the gravest insult in humanity's short interstellar history, and they were still laughing. She felt the weight of her sidearm against her hip, the heat of 1,000 suns coiling in her chest, and made a choice that would redefine what it meant to be human among the stars. The Accord station hung in the void between 3 suns, a monument to diplomacy forged from asteroid iron and alien alloys. Elena had traveled 6 months through slipspace to reach it, carrying Earth's petition for full membership in the Galactic Council. She was the first human to stand before the Council of Nine, a collection of species that had ruled this corner of the galaxy for 2 millennia. The chamber itself was a cathedral of power. Vaulted ceilings stretched 50 meters high, carved from a single piece of black stone that drank in light and gave back only reflections. 9 throne seats ringed the central floor, each tailored to its occupant's physiology. The Thexian representative coiled in a pool of liquid methane. The Karathi envoy perched on crystalline spires that sang when he shifted his weight. And at the head of the circle sat Supreme Archon Zelith, a being whose species, the Varun, had chaired the council for 600 years. Zelith was humanoid in the way a praying mantis is humanoid. 3 meters tall, chitinous plates the color of old bruises, and compound eyes that fractured Elena's image into 1,000 smaller versions of herself. His translator box hung from a silver chain around his thorax, rendering his clicks and whistles into flat mechanical English. "Ambassador Voss," Zelith had said, his mandibles spreading in what the briefing materials called a smile. "We wish to join the Accord. Tell us why we should permit this." Elena had rehearsed her speech for months. She spoke of humanity's contributions to art and science, of their resilience through countless extinctions, of their potential as partners in a galaxy that still held so many mysteries. She talked about the terraforming techniques developed in Mars's dust, the quantum encryption codes that had revolutionized Earth's communications, and the medical advances that had extended human lifespans by decades. The council listened in silence. When she finished, Zelith tilted his head, a gesture that meant curiosity in Varun body language. "You bring us gifts of knowledge," he said, "but we already possess these things. What else can humanity offer?" Elena had prepared for this, too. She unfurled the flag she'd carried across 6 light years, a rectangle of Martian-grown cotton, hand-stitched with 50 stars and 13 stripes. It was one of 12 flags that had flown over the UN Assembly in New Geneva, blessed by representatives from every nation on Earth. "We offer our history," she said, holding the flag so the chamber's dim light caught the weave. "This banner represents our capacity for unity. 50 regions, once separate, now one nation. Hundreds of nations, now one world. We've learned to set aside old hatreds and build something greater. That's what we bring to the Accord, proof that it can be done." The silence that followed felt different, heavier. Then Zelith rose from his throne. He descended the steps with a clicking gait, his shadow falling over Elena like a shroud. He reached out with one clawed hand, and she handed him the flag, thinking he wanted to examine it more closely. Instead, he threw it to the floor. "Unity," he said, and his translator gave the word a mocking edge. "You speak of unity as though it were a virtue, but unity without strength is merely weakness pooled together." He gestured, and a Thexian attendant glided forward, carrying a crystalline torch filled with blue flame. Zelith took the torch. He held it over the flag for a long moment, letting Elena understand exactly what he intended to do. Your species has been in space for less than a century. You have no claim to the stars, no right to stand among those who have earned their place through millennia of dominance. You are children playing with fire." He dropped the torch. The flag caught instantly. Martian cotton burned with a strange, slow elegance, the fibers curling into themselves as the flames consumed the stars one by one. The stripes blackened and fell away. Within seconds there was nothing left but ash and a smell like burnt hope. The Council of Nine laughed. It wasn't cruel laughter, not exactly. It was the sound of adults watching a toddler attempt a task far beyond its ability, patronizing, dismissive, the kind of laughter that said, "We've seen this before, and it always ends the same way." Elena stood perfectly still. Her hands didn't shake, her voice didn't waver when she said, "I see." Zeleth returned to his throne, mandibles still spread. "You may remain on the station for 3 days to resupply your vessel. After that, you will return to Earth and inform your leaders that humanity is not yet ready for the Accord. Perhaps in another 1,000 years we will reconsider." "Understood," Elena said. She turned and walked out of the high chamber, ash clinging to her boots. Behind her, the laughter continued. But she was already planning.
Elena's quarters on the Accord station were small and sterile, a concession to human biology in a structure designed for beings who breathed methane or bathed in radiation. She sat on the narrow cot, hands folded in her lap, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel the full weight of what had just happened. She thought about the 12-year-old girl in Lagos who'd written, "We believe in you," on the flag's hem in permanent marker. She thought about the veteran in Sao Paulo who'd folded it with hands that still trembled from neural damage, a gift from the last war humans had fought among themselves. She thought about the grandmother in Kyoto who'd sewn a prayer into the stars, asking that her great-grandchildren might see a galaxy at peace. Then the 5 minutes were up, and Elena Voss became something other than a grieving ambassador. She'd been a combat pilot before joining the diplomatic corps, 14 years flying strike missions in the Belt Wars, back when Earth's factions still fought over ores and orbital rights. She'd earned 3 silver nebulas and a court-martial for disobeying a direct order that would have sent her entire squadron into a radiation trap. The diplomatic corps had recruited her precisely because she understood how to negotiate from a position of weakness and how to make weakness look like strength. But diplomacy was a tool, and when a tool failed, you reached for another. Elena accessed the station's public directories through her wrist terminal. The Accord prided itself on transparency. Every species had access to the same databases, the same maps, the same schedules. It took her 20 minutes to find what she needed. Supreme Archon Zeleth maintained private chambers in the northern hub. He followed a rigid schedule, meditation in the mornings, council sessions in the afternoons, and a solitary dinner each evening in the observation dome. His security detail rotated on a 4-hour cycle, and there was a 6-minute gap between shifts when the guards changed positions. 6 minutes. Elena pulled up schematics of the northern hub. The ventilation system was designed for Varun physiology, oxygen-nitrogen mix at higher pressure than humans preferred, but survivable. The ducts were large enough for a human to crawl through, assuming that human was willing to dislocate a shoulder to make the tight turns. She'd dislocated both shoulders before. Twice. Next, she inventoried her equipment. The diplomatic corps didn't send ambassadors into space unarmed, but the weapons were carefully chosen to avoid interstellar incidents. Her sidearm was a holdout plasma pistol, small enough to palm and powerful enough to punch through light armor. She also carried a monofilament knife,
carbon-edged, nearly invisible to most scanners, sharp enough to split atoms if you knew where to cut.
But those were just tools. The real weapon was knowledge. Elena spent the next 18 hours in the station's archives, studying Varun biology. She learned that their chitin was nearly impervious to kinetic weapons, but vulnerable to sustained heat. She learned that their primary nervous cluster sat just below the thorax, protected by overlapping plates that could be separated if you knew the angle. She learned that Varun's society valued strength above all else, and that public humiliation was considered a fate worse than death. She also learned about the Accord's founding principles. The Council of Nine governed through something called the Law of Ascension, which held that any being who demonstrated superiority over a council member could claim that member's seat. It was an ancient tradition, rarely invoked, designed to prevent stagnation and ensure that only the strongest voices shaped galactic policy. There were rules, of course. The challenge had to be witnessed. The combat had to be single and unarmed, interpreted broadly to mean without technological enhancement, and the victor had to prove their dominance in a way that left no doubt. Elena smiled for the first time since entering the high chamber. She spent the next day observing Zeleth's routine. She watched him glide through the northern hub's corridors, trailed by guards who looked bored. She noted how he tilted his head to examine star charts in the observation dome, mandibles clicking in a rhythm that matched his translator's cadence. She saw him eat, a process that involved crushing nutrient capsules between serrated plates and absorbing the liquid through specialized pores. And she saw something else, something the briefing materials hadn't mentioned. Zeleth was old, not just in years, but in the way his chitin had begun to dull at the edges, the way his movements had a fractional delay that spoke of failing reflexes. The Varun lived for centuries, but even they weren't immortal. Zeleth had held his seat on the council for 600 years, which meant he'd won his position in a time when Earth's ancestors were still painting on cave walls. He'd gotten comfortable, complacent. Elena finalized her plan. She would invoke the Law of Ascension during Zeleth's evening meditation, when the observation dome would be empty except for the Supreme Archon himself. The challenge would be public, transmitted to every screen on the station, as the law required. And when it was done, she would make sure that every species in the galaxy understood what happened when you burned Earth's flag in front of a human. On the third day, 1 hour before Zeleth's scheduled meditation, Elena Voss walked into the northern hub. She wore her diplomatic corps uniform, midnight blue with gold piping, the UN crest embroidered over her heart. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. Her sidearm was holstered at her hip, visible and legal. The guards didn't stop her. She was, after all, just an ambassador. She entered the observation dome as the suns began their descent beyond the station's hall.
The observation dome was a hemisphere of transparent aluminum, 30 meters across, offering an unobstructed view of the 3 suns that anchored this sector. Their light painted the dome's interior in shades of amber, crimson, and pale violet. Zeleth stood at the center, his compound eyes reflecting the cosmic display in fractured rainbows. He didn't turn when Elena entered. "Ambassador Voss," he said, his translator rendering the words with mechanical precision. "You were scheduled to depart 3 hours ago. Your ship has already been cleared for undocking." "I'm not leaving," Elena said. Now he turned. His mandibles spread slightly. Confusion or amusement, she couldn't tell. "You have no authority to remain on this station. If you do not comply with the Council's directive, you will be escorted to your vessel by force." "I invoke the Law of Ascension," Elena said. The dome's ambient hum seemed to deepen. Zeleth's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound that needed no translation. Shock. "You what?" "The Law of Ascension," Elena repeated. She pulled up the legal code on her wrist terminal and projected it into the air between them. Ancient text in 12 languages scrolled across the hologram. "Any being may challenge a council member for their seat, provided the challenge is witnessed and the combat is conducted without technological enhancement. I challenge you, Supreme Archon Zeleth, for your position on the Council of Nine." Zeleth's laughter was a chittering sound that made Elena's teeth ache. "You are insane. The Law of Ascension is a relic from a barbaric age. It has not been invoked in 4 centuries. "But it hasn't been repealed," Elena said, "which means it's still binding, unless you're refusing the challenge." The laughter stopped.
Refusing a challenge under the law of Ascension was an admission of weakness, a public declaration that the challenged party was unfit to hold their seat. Rezeleth, who had built his entire identity on 600 years of dominance, refusal was impossible. "You will die," he said simply. "Maybe," Elena said, "but the law requires witnesses, so let's make sure everyone's watching." She activated the dome's broadcast system. Within seconds, every screen on the Accord station flickered to life, showing the confrontation in real time. The feed went out to the 8 other council members, to the diplomatic envoys from 40 species, to the maintenance workers and traders and scholars who called the station home. And beyond the station, the broadcast rippled outward. Faster-than-light relays carried it to colony worlds and trade hubs, to the Thexian homeworld and the Karathi crystal gardens, and eventually to Earth. Elena Voss was about to make history. Zeleth descended from the observation platform, his claws clicking against the dome's floor. "Very well. Since you are so eager to embrace your death, I will grant it to you. The law of Ascension demands single combat, unarmed. Remove your weapon." Elena unholstered her plasma pistol and set it on the floor. Then she pulled the monofilament knife from its sheath and placed it beside the gun. "Your turn." The observation dome was a hemisphere of transparent aluminum, 30 meters across, offering an unobstructed view of the 3 suns that anchored this sector. Their light painted the dome's interior in shades of amber, crimson, and pale violet. Zeleth stood at the center, his compound eyes reflecting the cosmic display in fractured rainbows. He didn't turn when Elena entered. "Ambassador Voss," he said, his translator rendering the words with mechanical precision. "You were scheduled to depart 3 hours ago. Your ship has already been cleared for undocking." "I'm not leaving," Elena said. Now he turned. His mandibles spread slightly. Confusion or amusement, she couldn't tell. "You have no authority to remain on this station. If you do not comply with the Council's directive, you will be escorted to your vessel by force." "I invoke the law of Ascension," Elena said. The dome's ambient hum seemed to deepen. Zeleth's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound that needed no translation. Shock. "You what?" "The law of Ascension," Elena repeated. She pulled up the legal code on her wrist terminal and projected it into the air between them. Ancient text in 12 languages scrolled across the hologram. "Any being may challenge a council member for their seat, provided the challenge is witnessed and the combat is conducted without technological enhancement. I challenge you, Supreme Archon Zeleth, for your position on the Council of 9. Zeleth's laughter was a chittering sound that made Elena's teeth ache. "You are insane. The law of Ascension is a relic from a barbaric age. It has not been invoked in 4 centuries. "But it hasn't been repealed," Elena said, "which means it's still binding, unless you're refusing the challenge." The laughter stopped. Refusing a challenge under the law of Ascension was an admission of weakness, a public declaration that the challenged party was unfit to hold their seat. Rezeleth, who had built his entire identity on 600 years of dominance, refusal was impossible. "You will die," he said simply. "Maybe," Elena said, "but the law requires witnesses, so let's make sure everyone's watching." She activated the dome's broadcast system. Within seconds, every screen on the Accord station flickered to life, showing the confrontation in real time. The feed went out to the 8 other council members, to the diplomatic envoys from 40 species, to the maintenance workers and traders and scholars who called the station home. And beyond the station, the broadcast rippled outward. Faster-than-light relays carried it to colony worlds and trade hubs, to the Thexian homeworld and the Karathi crystal gardens, and eventually to Earth. Elena Voss was about to make history. Zeleth descended from the observation platform, his claws clicking against the dome's floor. "Very well. Since you are so eager to embrace your death, I will grant it to you. The law of Ascension demands single combat, unarmed. Remove your weapon." Elena unholstered her plasma pistol and set it on the floor. Then she pulled the monofilament knife from its sheath and placed it beside the gun. "Your turn."
Zeleth spread his arms. His chitin plates gleamed in the tricolor light. "I am a Varun. We are born armed." "Then I guess I'll have to work with what I've got," Elena said. The first strike came faster than she'd anticipated. Zeleth lunged forward, claws extended, and slashed at her throat. Elena dropped into a roll, feeling the displaced air where her neck had been. She came up behind him and drove her elbow into the seam between two plates, right where her research said the secondary nerve cluster would be. Zeleth hissed and spun, backhanding her across the dome. She hit the transparent wall hard enough to crack it and fell to the floor, gasping. Blood filled her mouth. At least one rib was broken. "You are strong for a human," Zeleth said, stalking toward her. "But strength is not enough. You lack the tools to harm me." Elena spat blood and forced herself upright. "You talk too much." She feinted left, then dove right, grabbing her plasma pistol from where she'd left it. Zeleth's mandibles spread in triumph until Elena threw the gun at his face. He batted it aside easily, but the distraction gave her the half-second she needed to grab the monofilament knife. "Unarmed combat," Zeleth said, but there was uncertainty in his translator's tone now. "The law," Elena interrupted, "says no technological enhancement. A knife isn't technology. It's just a really sharp rock." She didn't give him time to argue. She closed the distance and slashed at the joint where his left arm met his thorax. The monofilament blade slid through chitin like it was paper, severing muscle and nerve. Zeleth's arm fell to the floor, still twitching. His scream was a sound that would haunt her for the rest of her life, a frequency that scraped against the inside of her skull. But she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to. Zeleth swung his remaining arm in a wild arc, claws fully extended. Elena ducked under the blow and drove the knife up into his thorax, angling for the primary nerve cluster she'd studied in the archives. The blade hit something hard, bone or cartilage, and stopped. Not deep enough. Zeleth seized her with his remaining hand, lifting her off the ground. His compound eyes filled her vision, 1,000 furious reflections staring back at her. "You are nothing, a brief annoyance. I will crush you and your species will be forgotten." Elena smiled through the blood. "You first." She twisted the knife, found the angle, pushed. The blade sank deep, and Zeleth's entire body went rigid, his grip loosened. He fell backward, hitting the dome floor with a crash that sent hairline fractures spreading across the transparent surface. Elena landed on her feet, barely. She stood over him, breathing hard, ribs screaming with every inhale. Zeleth was still alive. Varun nervous systems were redundant, designed to survive catastrophic damage, but he was paralyzed, his mandibles clicking weakly, unable to move. "The law of Ascension," Elena said, loud enough for the broadcast to catch every word, "requires that the victor demonstrate dominance, no ambiguity, no doubt." She knelt beside him and placed the monofilament knife against the edge of his chitin. "You burned our flag, so I'm gonna make a new one." What happened next would be debated by ethicists and historians for generations. Some would call it justice, others would call it barbarism. But everyone agreed on one thing. Elena Voss made sure that Supreme Archon Zeleth understood in his final moments what it meant to insult humanity. The skinning took 3 hours. Elena worked with the precision of a surgeon, peeling away Zeleth's chitin plates one by one and laying them out on the observation dome's floor in the pattern of Earth's flag. 13 stripes of mottled purple and gray,
a field of darker chitin where the stars would go. She used the monofilament knife to score the edges, ensuring clean lines, and her own blood to mark the boundaries when Zeleth's ichor ran dry. The broadcast never cut away. Across the Accord Station, beings from 40 species watched in stunned silence. On the Thexian homeworld, elders who had lived for millennia stopped their meditations to witness the spectacle. In the Karathi Crystal Gardens, scholars abandoned their debates to stare at the screens. And on Earth, 6 months away by slipspace, but receiving the broadcast in real time through the relay network, billions of humans held their breath. Zeleth died somewhere around the second hour. His mandibles stopped clicking, his compound eyes went dark. But Elena didn't stop. She'd made a promise, and she intended to keep it. When the work was finished, she stood and surveyed the flag she'd created. It wasn't beautiful. The chitin was too rigid to drape properly, and the colors were wrong. Purple where there should have been red, gray instead of white. But it was recognizable. 13 stripes, 50 stars, etched into the darker plates with painstaking care. Old glory, remade from the skin of the being who'd burned it. Elena activated the dome's communication system. "This is Captain Elena Voss, acting under the authority of the law of Ascension. I have defeated Supreme Archon Zeleth in single combat and claim his seat on the Council of Nine. As my first act as a council member, I propose a motion that humanity be granted full membership in the Accord with all rights and privileges therein." The silence stretched for 10 seconds, 20. Then a voice crackled over the speakers, the Karathi envoy, his crystalline voice chiming like broken glass. "Seconded." The Thexian representative added their assent, then the Dravine, the Yol, the Sarathi. One by one, the Council of Nine, now the Council of Eight, pending Elena's official confirmation, voted to accept Earth into the Accord. It was unanimous. Elena allowed herself a single breath of relief. Then she collapsed. She woke 3 days later in the station's medical bay, suspended in a regeneration tank that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. A Dravine doctor stood outside the tank, their 3-fingered hands dancing over a control panel. "Ah," the doctor said when Elena's eyes opened, "you returned to consciousness. This is good. Your species has remarkable resilience." Elena tried to speak, but her throat was still healing. The doctor adjusted a dial on the tank. Warmth flooded her vocal cords, knitting damaged tissue. "How long?" Elena managed. 73 hours since your collapse. You sustained 4 fractured ribs, a ruptured spleen, a concussion, and extensive soft tissue damage. You also experienced cardiac arrest twice during the initial treatment, but we revived you both times." The doctor's, insofar as a being with compound eyes could have an expression, was disapproving. "You should not have survived the fight with Zeleth. His species is significantly stronger than yours." "I had motivation," Elena said. The doctor made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Indeed, the entire galaxy is now aware of your motivation." They released her from the tank 6 hours later, once the regeneration cycle had knitted her bones and regrown her spleen. Elena dressed in a fresh uniform. Someone thoughtfully provided a new one, complete with updated insignia. Where the UN crest had been, there was now a new symbol, Earth's flag, overlaid with the spiral emblem of the Accord.